This is WWE superstar Drew McIntyre, and you're listening to the WWE Podcast.
The champ is the one that everybody wants, me.
It's going to WrestleMania. Claymore!
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass. This is my iron. You're going to acknowledge me.
Welcome to the current state of WWE, everybody. It is Monday, April 10th, 2023, and I've got Anthony with me as we do every single week, and we are back together. It's post-Mania. We're headed towards Backlash in 3 weeks or so, and we've got a draft coming up. We have a WWE Draft for the first time, and my God, I don't even know. It's at least been 3 years. I feel like it's about 3 years since we've had a draft, and that was announced this past week on SmackDown by Triple H. And Anthony, welcome. And what do you make of this announcement?
Well, I make of it is that it seems like it's 2 years too late, and not because I think that they weren't doing well without the WWE Draft. I think the product, between, let's say, last summer and WrestleMania was at its best in probably close to a decade, if not more. But too late in the sense of how often WWE went back to the well with the draft. Ever since really 2016, it felt like they had it once a year, and at times it felt like they even surpassed that a bit. Like from 2016 to 2017, they had a draft 8 months after it, the inaugural brand split when they brought it back in 2016. So, I mean, it's certainly going to be interesting. It feels also like they kind of felt like they found a hybrid, and you and I share this role, or not this role, this perspective, that we prefer when the brand split rules are very enforced. But I felt like they almost have found a way that even sometimes if they broke those rules, it felt that it was normalized. So it felt like the product was going in a good way without the draft. But now seems like that they're due for a change because it's just been so long.
It's been a while. I'm trying to dig up the last time that a draft was done. It was pre-COVID, so that tells you all you need to know. And it's been quite a while. And I mean, I think you hit it. Your last point hit it on the head for me of the concern. And I feel like I should be excited about this. I want to be excited about this. My brain is saying you should, but the problem is exactly what you just brought up in the latter part of your open is that, hey, they don't adhere to their own rules. I mean, if you don't adhere to your own rules of being having a draft split, then don't even do one at all. Just kind of had this hybrid loose. You kind of have people on SmackDown and Raw, but it's essentially devolved from the last draft. I mean, just keep it as is because I think it's working. You could just propose trades if you want to create news. You could have, so-and-so's been traded from SmackDown to Raw and vice versa if you want to shake things up. But my biggest concern is that they're going to quote unquote draft people. Even if they're call-ups, new stars, that's fun. But then, in a month, they're on the opposing brand with no explanation. Like, for me, that completely kills it. And they have shown time and time and time again that they can't. And it's really discipline. They have no discipline. And then they try this wild card rule crap. Oh, of course, this is under Vince, right? And they have the quarterly invitational, and then they scrapped everything, and they're like, well, whoever needs to be on this show should just be on this show. Whoever needs to be on this show just is on this show, and we don't need to provide an explanation. That's my biggest concern about this whole thing.
I have a question for you. Now that we've kind of brought back these memories of when they were really disregarding the rules of the brand split, how bad was the product in the year leading up to COVID when they went into the Performance Center? Like, thinking back on it now, which coincidentally is when you and I started doing this show, was the product in really rough shape in 2019 when Seth Rollins was Universal Champion?
I mean, from what I recall, it wasn't, things weren't being blown out of the arena. I mean, it was, from what I recall, wasn't that when Seth did he was about to turn into the Monday Night Messiah, but he wasn't quite there yet, and did he align himself with AOP, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Following him dropping the title to The Fiend at the Saudi Arabia event.
Yeah. Which actually, I really enjoyed that. I don't think they got nearly enough mileage out of that whole deal with AOP, and I remember them in the back of a truck and all that. Like it was, that was fun. I mean, outside of that, though, things for me only picked up when Edge returned in 2020 at the Rumble, of course, and then we all shut down for a year and a half with COVID. So from what I remember, Seth as Universal Champion was not exactly exciting. It was, of course, a different time. His babyface character wasn't super exciting, but that's really what I remember.
And Roman Reigns, he was just back from, was that when when did he get cancer? Do you remember that? Like, what was the period where he had to step away?
Yeah, that I think it was like did he make the announcement in like 2018?
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had just shortly returned to WWE. Of course, he's still the big dog. One of the most just abhorrent characters of all time.
It's brutal.
It's almost
brutal to go back and look back at him. He doesn't even look like the same person. Like his face changed too.
That's the thing. It's embarrassing to see where he was and just the forced character and just the total uncomfortableness of watching him because he's uncomfortable and he doesn't believe in his own character. I mean, the whole thing from start to finish. I'm so glad the big dog is never, ever going to return ever, I would hope. But yeah, I mean, it was just a different time and it really wasn't that long ago. But to answer your question, 2019 is outside of those few moments that we just mentioned, wasn't exactly a barn burner of a year. And, I think a draft can, in principle, help shake things up. I mean, that's the phrase they use. It shakes things up, right? But what are your concerns? Do you have concerns about this going in? Because there are positives, and I want to address what those could be going into the draft in a few weeks. What are some of the drawbacks? I mean, beyond, of course, that they have no discipline to really adhere to their own damn rules.
Well, I think some of the drawbacks are inherently just risking some of the programs you already have going. Now, in the current state, no double pun intended, of what's going on in WWE right now with their creative, their main event storyline has kind of flexed between both shows, although it's predominantly been SmackDown. But, the Usos are technically members of SmackDown, as is Sami Zayn, but Kevin Owens is always on SmackDown and vice versa. And it kind of seems like the rule of thumb here, more often than not, is that if you're involved with Roman Reigns and or the Bloodline somehow, that makes you kind of not having to adhere to the rules of the brand split. Have you caught that?
Yep, and they've expanded that also to the Judgment Day this week with Rhea Ripley coming out on SmackDown, and she had the Judgment Day with her, and it's like, well, this isn't just exclusive to Judgment Day or the Bloodline, although the bigger you are, of course, the more that we just accept that you're on our show, even though you shouldn't be. But I guess, yeah, like, if you're a part of a major storyline, whether it's Judgment Day or Bloodline, yeah, I mean, there's no explanation. You're just automatically excused because it's like, well, it helps further the story, so no problem. Like, yeah, so certainly.
And so I guess to go back to your question about the concerns, aside from Bloodline storylines, I do think that they've predominantly been able to keep some storylines exclusive to their respective brands. And I look on SmackDown and, I really am enjoying Imperium. And I know some people are sick of them, but I like Sheamus and Drew McIntyre. Like, I think SmackDown has a very, very strong upper mid card. Like, when you have obviously the Bloodline storyline going on at the top of the show, and then right under them you have like Drew, you have Sheamus, you have Gunther, and then even under those guys like LA Knight, I know he's maybe a bit boring, but Karrion Kross, like, I think Karrion Kross is a valuable piece to have even in your lower mid card. Like, I just find that SmackDown in particular right now has a lot of good things going on. And in my opinion, the entire show more or less is quality TV. So I guess the risk and my fear is that you're going to upset some things that are going well.
Well, that's, yes. I mean, beyond, again, the discipline we talked about, the biggest problem I see is you have pillars of SmackDown that are working so well. You have faces of the show, like the whole bloodline, the entire bloodline are faces of the show. You have Sammy, who's the face of the show. Of course, Kevin and Sammy can now float between brands because they're undisputed champions, so that actually makes sense. But also Imperium, and you have Gunther, who is a absolute foundational piece of SmackDown that I can't imagine going to Raw. I mean, to me, there are certain untouchables in this draft where you have things working so well on SmackDown with those two individuals, and you could maybe come up with a very select few else, but those two to me, untouchable. I really don't think that they should mess with the formula of SmackDown because it is such a well-formed show. Of course, the 2 hours always helps, as we mentioned, rather than 3. But there are certain guys that you just look forward to every Friday night. They seem to be booked really well. The storylines are coherent. The matches are really good. Everything just seems to flow nicely. And there, again, I understand the temptation to, wow, it's big news. Gunther's going to be a part of Raw. It's like, what? But like, then what do you do with that massive hole on SmackDown? Are you going to fill it with the U.S. champion of Austin Theory? That's usually what they'll do. But I don't know. Do you feel like there are any untouchables, i.e. Gunther and or the Bloodline, not just staying on SmackDown, but maybe not being able to break those groups up? Because the odds are, I mean, that if it was a real draft, they would be broken up. But how do you think they should do this in terms of breaking groups up like those two massive factions?
Well, here's the thing, is that it used to be when they would have this draft once a year, once every 2 years, is that the brands would stay collectively on their existing shows and they would swap, 5, 6, 7 guys? Like, I remember one time they did the draft in 2005, and it was every Raw and every SmackDown, they would get one guy from the opposite brand that would show up. And it went on for like 4 or 5 weeks. And that was arguably the best brands or draft done. And I don't even think it was called the draft. Maybe it was called the draft. And that was like the most significant one they ever did, because Batista went to SmackDown with the world title and Cena went to Batista went to SmackDown and Cena went to Raw. And it was the first time they had ever swapped world championships. And I think that if they go down that road where you keep the existing rosters in place, it allows you to be able to move away from possibly risking something like, losing Gunther or to Raw, or just an arbitrary name like Seth Rollins going to SmackDown. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to be in a giant pool and they're going to be reconstructed from scratch like they are presumably going to be this time around, because that's how they always do it. And I think that's when you really run the risk of really taking the identity away from the show, because the way that they've been doing it since 2016, more or less, I believe, is that they all just kind of lose the identities of those shows because the rosters are just built completely up again. But if you do it in the 2005 mold, you have a way to keep the existing integrity and congruity on those respective shows. Like, I remember usually championships were not allowed. Like, if you were the IC champ or you were the US champ, you weren't going to be like swapped in the brand split, because those titles were almost exclusive to the respective brands. Do you think if maybe they go back to that 2005 formula and model, it would help to preserve some of those storylines that are so kind of in lockstep with their respective brand?
Yeah, because like you said, if they completely just break it down, go scorched earth and build it from the ground up, I mean, I don't think there's a need to do that, right? Like, especially on SmackDown. Raw does need help, and that's probably one of the strongest cases to have the draft is, well, Raw does need help. Therefore, let's bring some stars over. But as you and I have said, it's a perfect time to maybe reintroduce not just new stars, but hell, I don't know, crazy idea. Let's bring a world championship back to Raw, have it just be a part of the draft. We've mentioned this many times, and I think that would absolutely help Raw in the biggest way possible. Now, I would like that 2005 strategy, or that formula, because it does keep things in place, but it also creates surprises every week instead of just having people on stage and pulling out of some kind of pulling out of a hat type of deal. Like, no, of course you're going to pick the largest stars first, and then we always see the back end of the draft is published on the website or whatever. No, I mean, I don't know how they're going to do it. They haven't said the structure of it. They just announced generally they're having a draft in a few weeks. So if I was to run this, absolutely, I would run it in that fashion. I mean, where you have certain men and women who are the faces of those brands, stay those faces of those brands. But that's not the way that Triple H unfortunately explained it. He said everyone's eligible, which sounds to me like they are going from the ground up.
I have a question for you. We went through a period, I would say, from 2013-ish until 2017-18-ish, where the authority figure was played out far too much, and they were part of the storylines far too often. Do you think they're in need to like bring back an authority figure? And I know there's Adam Pearce, but one who is more intimately involved and maybe is assigned to a respective brand, like a Raw GM and a SmackDown GM. Do you think that would be a good thing to do?
So we got so tired of it for so long. I'm resisting saying yes, but I'll split the difference on this one, and not to be a coward or a cop-out. It's just that there are certain times when an authority figure makes sense. I think what they did in that time frame that you're referencing is make that person or persons too much a part of the show when it should have been on the wrestlers themselves and the storylines. Therefore, what I would propose is if you're going to create commissioners or GMs or whatever title you want to give them, officials, for each show, then have them come out sparingly. Only when it's absolutely necessary, when it seems to be a big moment or a big match, that person is there to help push things forward in a logical way, but not on a weekly basis having them be a part of the show, because whether it's babyface or heel, and Lord knows we've seen our share of heel commissioners and heel GMs, that I think has kind of run its course, and I don't even know what the hell Adam Pearce is. Sometimes he plays both. But I think that if you have a person who is there when needed, whether it's once a month, every 2 months, every 4 months, whatever, that I would do, where it's kind of just like this overarching authority that at any point could come in to set things right.
Do you think that Triple H should take on more of an on-screen role? Like, do you think people would like that? Maybe not as intense as Vince in the late 90s, early 2000s, but do you think maybe like a Vince role where in like the mid 2000s where he would show up maybe once every 18 months to have a feud with Donald Trump or Shawn Michaels?
Well, I would say, here's the thing. I would be more open to it if he could even take a single bump or he could give a bump, because with his heart condition, I would imagine he's not cleared to do anything at all. Now, I'm not saying he should be in a wrestling capacity, but sometime, I mean, with Triple H, he's a legend among legends in the business, and at some point you'd like to see him knock somebody on their ass, and that's what makes and differentiates, Triple H from like an Adam Pearce is he could probably kick your ass, and if you push him far enough, he would, and that's the difference. But Triple H on air more, I mean, I actually would say no, and the reason is, number one, he can't get physical at all from what I understand. Number two, I think that you have Triple H backstage, and I think that having him backstage is where his focus should be if Vince is not in charge. If you were to put Triple H on air, then he'd be worried about, and you have to be concerned about every week, what's his creative? What's he doing on air? This and that. I think he should be focused backstage. I think that's where he's most used and best used. And when he comes out, and he has, obviously, this past week to thank the fans and announce the draft, that to me, when he comes out, is a big deal. And it should feel like a big deal. If they're there every week, whether it's Triple H or anybody, it waters down what that role means, and it sucks up time that should and could and would be used by actual wrestlers and matches and storylines. So I would say no. I like Triple H there, but only when necessary, because it then feels important. You heard the pop he got on SmackDown and on Raw. Very big. People are excited to see him, and kind of a moment for the fans to connect with Triple H and say thank you for the last 8 months of giving us the product that you have. It has felt, fresh and new, and you've put a nice spin on things and bringing people back and everything. So I would toss that back to you. What do you think?
I was going to say yes because I like Triple H a lot, but what you said, one thing there that made me completely switch my feeling on it, and that's, are we going to Wait, what was it that you said? You just said it. Oh yeah, it won't feel as special. And I feel like that's what happened in 2013, 2014. Is that thinking back on it during the Authority run, like Triple H and Stephanie McMahon did really good jobs in their roles. Like they really conveyed their roles properly. But they was just so overused and it was so overtired that people grew to resent it by, let's say, 2016, 2017, when it really kind of came to a close. I believe culminating with not Shawn Michaels, Triple H and Seth Rollins at WrestleMania 33. And I think that maybe that's what would happen because of the point you just made of would we start to get tired with Triple H if he started coming out, even twice a month or something, bi-weekly. And it feels so special right now. Like it almost feels like it did 15 to 20 years ago when Vince would come out, or Linda McMahon, oddly enough, or Shane McMahon. Like when the McMahons would come out, it would feel very special aside from some short periods. And it's so weird to now be in a position where that vibe is attached to Triple H. So originally I was in favor of yes, but after that point you just made, it is a no because you want it to feel so special.
And I feel like it also be knowing that we, again, assuming that he's truly in charge of creative. We've heard he was back last week, but then he's not this week, and he wasn't in SmackDown in Seattle or Portland, wherever they were. And that he has stepped aside to let the creative run itself. So I'm just going to go with Triple H is in charge. So my point is, though, that if Triple H were to be there on a weekly or even bi-weekly basis, I feel like it'd be weird seeing him knowing that he's in charge of creative and yet he's an on-air authority figure. It's weird. It would be like... I don't know. It would be like Brian Gewirtz, a writer from in WWE, coming out and making matches, and it's just like kind of two levels of reality I have to disassociate myself with. It's kind of weird. So I think yes, having Triple H come out makes things more important and feel more special when he is actually there. So no, I don't. I don't prescribe to seeing Triple H every single week, and I think backstage he seems to be doing a very good job as well.
As far as Vince McMahon goes, like he comes back and he does that, not a press conference, but that interview with Ari Emanuel on CNBC, and it's very like real, right? Like it's a completely real life interview and segment that we're watching. And I'm watching Vince McMahon, and like obviously he dyed his hair, obviously he's grown a mustache. I don't want to speculate, but it seems like he's had several procedures done to his face. I mean, I don't think I'm offside in saying that. It looks like something has gone on there. And he almost just looks like a completely different person. And I'm wondering if, like, after all the greatness that Vince McMahon did from, let's say, the mid-'80s until the mid-2010s, like a very significant run, 3 decades, maybe even 4, some would argue, of brilliant content producing and business acumen, like what he built. But watching him in that interview, did that at all make you feel like, man, this guy's tarnishing his legacy day by day?
It's the equivalent of a wrestler not knowing when it's time to go and they start to embarrass themselves in the ring. Except obviously Vince is in an executive role, no longer in ring, never really had an in-ring career outside of battling Austin and Hogan and Brett. But outside of that, no. So it's that equivalent to me where you just like watching, and you're like, oh, this is getting bad. And you just brought up the point that I think a lot of us are forgetting when we're having this hate Vince movement, right? Like this hashtag fire Vince, all this stuff, right? Which I understand the frustration of is that we wouldn't be here, number one, without Vince. I wouldn't be talking to you right now without Vince. I wouldn't have this podcast. People wouldn't be fans, have all these memories. I mean, everybody can create their own personal story about the effect wrestling has had on your life. None of that would exist without Vince. He's given us some of the best moments that we've ever seen in wrestling, some of the best matches, some of the best characters. He's personally responsible for The Undertaker, and others. So I really, have to, when I make negative statements about Vince, have to put it in that context. And people think he's Satan incarnate, that he's, the spawn of Satan, all this. I've heard it all, right? And I get it. I understand the frustration, but I understand. I also respect everything he's given us. Now, that said, I am totally against Vince even touching creative at this stage of his life. He is clearly mentally deteriorating. He's physically deteriorating, no matter how many times he tries to cover it up. Or as someone put it on another podcast, that he looks like a cartoon villain, or he belongs on a wanted poster. Like, that's so true. He does. He looks absolutely ridiculous. But that doesn't help him. And he dyed his hair, he dyed his eyebrows. He just looks ridiculous. He just should age it with grace. But in our society, that's not what people do with money anymore. Anyway, I don't want Vince to touch in creative. If he wants to be in some executive key role backstage, or in the corporate offices, like, go for it, bro. Like, this is your baby. You helped create it. But I don't want him anywhere near creative. We have seen the extent of what Vince can produce. And he's had some great stuff. He's had a lot of not so great stuff in the second half. So, long answer short, no, Vince should not be anywhere near creative at all.
Yeah, and it's sad to say, because people maybe choose to forget, or weren't fans at the time, or weren't even born at that time. Like, we've gone that far away from it, from when Vince was at his heyday. And that was both from an on-screen perspective and from a creative and writing perspective. Because people forget, like, you can make the case that the character Mr. McMahon is the most dastardly heel of all time. Like, everyone rightfully kind of points to Rock versus Austin, or Hogan versus Andre as like the biggest rivalries of all time. But you can make the case, and I think there's a very strong case to make, that Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon is the best, or Mr. McMahon rather, is the best rivalry of all time. And it is crazy to say that, not in ring, but from a believability and mic perspective, Vince McMahon is one of the greatest of all time. And then you look at the product that he was putting out there, the product of, let's say from 1997 to 2005 or 2006, which in my opinion is, the greatest era of wrestling. And if you want to get more specific, probably 97 to 2002. And I just think it's important to remember that even though he's making kind of a fool of himself on national TV, and it looks like he's borderline going insane when you hear the stories that are coming out from backstage as to when he takes over, but I just, like, it's hard for me to completely, look past this, because, he was such a brilliant guy, both from a creative perspective and an entertainment perspective 25 years ago.
Yeah, you don't just stumble into success like this if you're a total idiot, right? If you're like Vince McMahon you can call him an evil genius, a plain old genius, whatever, but you can't just call him lucky, or that, that everyone else did this for him. He had a lot of help, but Vince McMahon was the centerpiece. He was the mastermind behind a lot of things. And like you mentioned with Stone Cold versus Vince, I don't think Stone Cold would have had the career he did without Vince. So the Austin character, the biggest star of all time, I will go to my grave with that. It wouldn't have been the biggest star of all time without Vince McMahon to counter his character. And, obviously the best storyline to me, one of the best of all time. So, yeah, it's just time. I mean, it's just time for Vince to step aside. And it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, that he has. Of course, we'll never know the 100% truth, because we're not backstage. We're not in the executive meetings and on and on. But from what I understand, the Endeavor organization has creative, or has control in the WWE in terms of in terms of decision-making power. So they own 51% of the company. So that means that Vince does not just have the final say. If Endeavor wants to remove Vince in a certain position and put him elsewhere, they can actually do that. Vince is no longer, I don't know if the sale's final, but once it is, Vince cannot just say, I'm going to do this and no one can tell me otherwise, because he doesn't own the organization at the level that he used to. Like, Vince McMahon, I think, owns a total right now of 18% of the WWE, where Endeavor owns 51%. So that's the encouraging part. Like, if Vince somehow snakes his way back into creative, if there's enough of a collective uproar from writers backstage and wrestlers themselves and the general audience from week to week and social media collectively coming together, I think they could, if Vince does this, they could easily push him back into whatever role that they want him to be in. So there is that. That's the encouraging part, if Vince does want to try to snake his way back in. But any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I would say is like, and this is like, it kind of borders on like conspiracy theory stuff because like, I mean, it has nothing to do with the actual product, but like, just kind of like spitballing here, like I believe Vince McMahon said something that if like it was Ari Emanuel who pulled him out of retirement. Did you catch that all where he said it
No.
was Ari Emanuel who had, I think I could be wrong, but from what I'm remembering, because it's something I remembered, or obviously what I'm remembering because it's something that stuck out, is that Vince mentioned Ari Emanuel as someone who specifically kind of spoke to him about bringing him back out of retirement. And in my head, I said to myself, like, did Ari Emanuel bring him back out of retirement and kind of like play on the heartstrings of Vince, who clearly missed the product and was pushed out because of outside pressure? And did he get him to come back, buy controlling stake of the company to maybe eventually finally free up WWE from the grips of Vince McMahon? And like, would he actually, if push came to shove, move on from Vince and, you know, give the reins to Nick Khan from a business perspective and Triple H from a creative perspective? Like, I know that's bordering on, you know, conspiracy theory and has nothing to do with the actual product, but like, is that anything you think that could ever have been a possibility?
It's not impossible. Again, everything's speculative right now. I mean, unless you get official statements and press releases from Endeavor or from WWE themselves, I don't think it's impossible. I mean, this is Vince's baby. We all knew that while Vince resigned, it felt like this seemed too easy for Vince McMahon to let something like this go without putting up a fight or trying to find a way back in. And he did, and he facilitated the sale. But I mean, your conspiracy theory isn't insane. I think there's maybe pieces of truth to that. I mean, I haven't heard anything to really support that. However, I think it's plausible. Yeah, I do. And one kind of final thing as we wrap it up here for the draft. I'm trying to tie it back to the draft because I could go on the Vince McMahon train for a while. But the draft, as we move forward, I mean, I guess. What do you think are some of the big positives that could come from this? I mean, we look at the potential call-ups. I would imagine some of them from NXT or maybe from the independents, or hell, maybe even AEW back to WWE. Do you see anything on the horizon from a new star perspective that somebody could be coming, or from another promotion, or from NXT or what have you?
Well, I think you gotta look at Monday Night Raw and the fact that they are missing mega star power. And, you know, that's crazy to say when you have a brand that has Seth Rollins and maybe to a lesser extent Bobby Lashley, but and Cody Rhodes, obviously. But it's no secret that the lack of a world championship for over a year now, we've officially, I think, gone past a year without a world champ on Raw. Raw feels like there's no real main event. It feels like at any particular Monday night that something else could be main eventing the show, as opposed to on SmackDown, 9 times out of 10, it is something Bloodline related, and as it should be. So I think when you look from a new star perspective, like, do they pull the trigger on Braun Breaker and put him on Monday Night Raw? Like, it kind of feels like he has to go to Monday Night Raw. And I think that, again, I'm not big on NXT. I don't know much about the creative and what goes on down there. But from what I know, he's the only one who could really shake things up from a main event perspective if you move him to Monday nights. And as far as, let's say, coming over from SmackDown to give, Raw a jolt in the arm, maybe you're looking at Gunther, which I hate to say because we just spoke about it. Gunther's become such an integral part of SmackDown and what he's done for that Intercontinental Championship. And I'm saying, like, man, do they think that maybe Gunther has elevated himself so high enough and they're not quite ready to pull the trigger on ending Roman Reigns' run, that they're just going to move Gunther over to SmackDown or move him over to Raw, place him in that Intercontinental Championship at the top of the card, and then try and use that as an elevation for the main scene on Raw without having to split the titles of Roman Reigns? So I guess for us subjectively, it's a bad thing and it's a negative because we love Gunther on SmackDown so much. But from a big picture objective perspective, maybe that's the biggest positive, because you have an in-house replacement already on the main roster, but just on the wrong brand, that could really drag up Raw's main event scene. What do you think about that?
I can't debate it. I mean, I don't know what their thinking is, what their logic is with the draft in terms of new call-ups. I think it's always a fine balance with NXT, because we all look at NXT and it's just, the reality is it's still a very distant third brand in terms of viewership and everything else. But I think that you have to look at this as, well, you need to bring up some guys and gals, but you also don't want to leave NXT with nothing. I mean, it is a place that once that star outgrows the landscape, you need to move them up. That's kind of the purpose of having an in-house training system, an in-house farming system, rather. And so, yeah, Braun Breaker seems to be a plausible call-up. I mean, you have a Grayson Waller out there, another big name, Tyler Bate, right? So you have some guys, but you can't bring them all up at once. And if they're all your top stars, you can't. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to just kind of like leave NXT with nothing. It's a constant system of helping, guys in the undercard get bigger, and then the person that's at the top goes to the main roster, and then that person who was just called out. Like, it's a constant wheel that keeps on moving. And so, yeah, I like that. And as far as who could be coming from the outside, I mean, I keep looking at the biggest name in pro wrestling as terms of free agency, January 1st, 2024. It's only 3 letters. Y'all know what I'm going to say. I mean, I desperately want MJF in WWE. I mean, I think it would be a blast. But as long as MJF comes to WWE, he's not going to be part of the draft. But in January, I think there's a possibility he could be part of the Rumble. And to me, he would be the biggest acquisition that WWE has gotten in like 10 years. I really would value him that high. And MJF to me would be the number one target if I was WWE. Now, Tony Khan has a very deep wallet, and I'm sure he will pay MJF whatever he wants to stay. But that doesn't mean WWE can't be a better place for MJF, even if they don't pay him as much money. So anyway, not draft related, but looking about 6 months down the line, 7-8 months actually, that is a place that I'm looking for, is MJF, and where he would go. I don't know, probably Raw, but I don't know. So yeah, MJF, I think, would change the landscape at WWE, because I know they tried to, and like, I don't want to go down a Cody Rhodes rabbit hole. You and I have made it like about almost 30 minutes now without going down it, so I'm going to try and tiptoe around this comment. But I feel like WWE in their minds felt, and for some people I do think they feel this way, so I'm not going to sit here and say that Cody doesn't have fans. Like, he clearly is over, and a lot of people are behind him. So this statement might not be true for everyone. But I think people thought, and some in WWE thought, that Cody Rhodes would change the landscape of WWE, but it hasn't to the capacity that they believed. Because the way they made his return feel, and the way that they pushed him, was almost as if they thought, like, yo, we got a game changer here, someone who's going to be just on par with Roman Reigns. But they've acknowledged that that's not the case. And after what happened on last Monday night with Brock Lesnar, I don't think that they have any plans to keep him on an imminent path with Roman Reigns. Maybe they're going to go away from this like they've done with Kevin Owens before, or Edge before, John Cena before, Brock before with Roman Reigns. It's just another notch on his belt. And I think MJF is a big enough star that he could possibly do that in a year's time. So, I mean, I think that would be a major addition, and that would actually feel like, okay, we got a real game changer here that could maybe go toe-to-toe with Roman Reigns. And hey, maybe it's a babyface Roman Reigns by that point. Yeah, I mean, that babyface turn's coming. There's still a lot more to get out of the heel version of Roman, no doubt, but the babyface turn is coming for Roman, and this time it'll be the one that Vince envisioned him, having for like 6 years.
It's going to be so good.
Oh, it's going to be brilliant. It's going to be so much fun. And I think we're probably a year minimum away from that, probably after WrestleMania 40. Maybe we can start talking about it. But as far as MJF, of course, yes. As far as another title coming to Raw for part of the draft, I'd love it. But here's the thing. With them now starting to more consistently mention that 1,000 days, I don't think they're going to want to do anything that could potentially devalue that 1,000-day reign. Now that they're, because of all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, they're going to take one belt off of Roman 48 days before the reign of 1,000 days. They're not going to want to tarnish it in any form or fashion. So once we get to the 1,000 days, I think we can all kind of take a breath, look around, and start to talk seriously now about, okay, now that we're past 1,000, maybe we can stick a title back on Raw for real this time. Maybe we can, have serious conversations every single month about Roman now possibly losing, and I think that's a real thing that after we get to the 1,000, now the 1,000 isn't a finish line, but it's a massive mile marker. And I think after that, we can really have a lot of fun. So any final wrap-up thoughts?
Yeah, the only question I would ask you is, again, it feels like an episode of us doing full circles on certain things, but based on what we know now a year later, because I remember both of us were in lockstep saying that we did not agree with the unification match of him versus Brock at WrestleMania 38, particularly because it was so predictable. But have you come around in any way to Roman Reigns holding both world titles?
I understand the value of it. I still, even in hindsight, I still wouldn't do it. It's not the worst decision in the world, but you're seeing the negative effects, as we've gone over so many times, of them struggling to make Raw feel like it has a true main event, and they've done the best they can, albeit they've shot themselves in the foot. You can't blame anybody but yourself for this. This is pro wrestling. But they've done a nice job of trying to create the illusion that the U.S. title is the most important championship on Raw. And it is. It's not an illusion, but we all know there's another one floating out there. So they've done a great job of elevating that title. And my God, has Gunther done an excellent job of elevating the IC. But on Raw specifically, that U.S. title, think about where it was just a year and a half, 2 years ago, when it was just it was just a complete joke. So I think that's one big benefit. But in hindsight, would I still do it? No, because looking at all the damage that's been done of not just having Raw kind of feel like a chore at times and not feel as important because it doesn't have a world champion. But again, the guys that aren't able to compete for this and have a spot at WrestleMania challenging for a world championship is that does affect the psyche of the guys there in real life, and you're messing with guys' careers and morale and all that. So in hindsight, I still wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you want to make Roman's run feel so special, but look at some of the guys that have been hurt by it. Like,
right.
I like Seth Rollins still. Like, his character has grown a little much for me, but I still really like him for everything he's done and how good of a competitor he is. But you can't deny that he feels less valued and not even in the same stratosphere as Roman Reigns does, because he's had no world title to compete for.
Right. And the one good thing about this draft, though, I think it's almost a guarantee that Seth and Roman will be drafted to the same brand. So that probably means Seth is coming to SmackDown, I'd imagine. They got to put them on the same brand. It's been since the Rumble of 2022 that we saw these two compete together. It's been long enough. The story's unfinished. There's something to be told there. And hey, who knows? Seth could ultimately be the one.
They've never done a real...
Go ahead.
And have they not ever really done like a real long-term story between these two, or just sporadic matches?
I feel like it's been pieced together. I feel like there hasn't been a 3-month proper program between these two. I could be completely wrong, but if it has happened, it's when he was the big dog and Seth was the corporate puppet under the authority. Because I can't remember
so long ago.
I know that's just it. Even if it happened, it's not fresh in the minds of fans. And honestly, do we want to remember that version of Roman anyway? So no, I think there is an absolute massive story to be told now that both characters are fully polished. They know who and what they are. They're both very successful now. Nothing feels forced. They got to put those two on the same brand. Can they not?
Yeah, and then maybe when you get past 1,000 days, Seth is the one to take the WWE Championship, or hell, both maybe. Who knows? But I just think you got to get Seth back. Like, he hasn't held a world championship in 3.5 years. Like, something needs to be done.
It's almost impossible to believe. Now you could say the same thing about everyone else, because Roman's reign has started at September of 2020. So there was that too. And I know that the championship was unified last year at WrestleMania. So yeah, it's hurting a lot of guys. And that's the thing. You're doing this at what cost? You're putting all the eggs in one basket. He's your one guy. There's no equal to Roman, but at what cost? And we're seeing some of those drawbacks here. So, all right. Well, I think we'll end it there, and great to have you back. I know that this past week you had power issues with an ice storm up there. So hopefully, fingers crossed that this week you'll be able to give us a brand new retro show.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be 3 weeks in the making, and I apologize for everyone again. Obviously, the week of WrestleMania, it was strategically planned for me not to record a show, but last week, and I believe we have a few listeners in the Montreal area. So if you're listening, you know what went on here last week, and I was without power for just about between 48 and 72 hours for sure, and couldn't record. But I do have something planned for this week. It's looking like JBL's run with the WWE Championship, but I'm not completely sure if we'll do that this week, but it's looking like that, and if not, somewhere down the line.
Nice. Very that run, I think it was a 10-month run, right? I think.
Yeah, longest SmackDown champion.
So, oh my gosh, yes, that was a run that made me so angry, but in the best way. So, absolutely great topic. I'm really looking forward, and others I'm sure are really looking forward to your return to Retro. It'll be 3 weeks in the making. Of course, totally out of our control, but I appreciate it, and thanks so much for coming on, man. We'll be chatting in a week.
Yeah, man. Looking forward to it.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the WWE Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a show, or head to WWEpodcast.com. And for all of these shows ad-free, head over to patreon.com/WWE Podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.